We're at the 12:02 or whatever time zone you're in, Mark, so maybe we should go ahead and get started. I'll turn it over.
Sounds good. So hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Brittany Dorsone, and I'll be our moderator for today's event. Thank you all for joining us for this Juneteenth seminar. Empowering Voices of Freedom, a look to the past for the future of authentic engagement of underrepresented communities in research. We're really excited to have this discussion with you all on how we can be intentional and meaningfully engage minoritized people with lived experiences of pain in research, establish and maintain true partnership and collaboration, and give back to these communities. A special thank you to the USASP Education and Professional Development Committee, the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access Committee, and the Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Racism Special Interest Group for sponsoring this event. And a huge thank you to our esteemed speakers for being here today and sharing their wisdom and experiences on these topics. We are all here to learn from one another, and I encourage us all to come here today with an open mind, non-judgment, and curiosity. We'll have someone monitoring the chat, so if you have questions, please put those in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. We will have time for an open Q&A at the end. And for anyone having any technical issues, we have Troy Dildine here, so please message him if you're having any problems with your Zoom. Please keep yourselves muted as well, just so there isn't any distracting background noise as we go through our discussion. And I will now begin by introducing our speakers, Dr. Star Booker, Joe Cross, and Regina Greer-Smith. Dr. Star Booker is a nurse scientist. Dr. Star Booker is a nurse scientist studying the lived experience of chronic pain in older adults. Her work in disparities and inequities focuses on osteoarthritis pain in African Americans, where she investigates movement-evoked pain, function, and pain self-management. Significant contributions include developing the first nursing clinical practice recommendations and a model for pain assessment and pain measurement in older African Americans. She has published over 80 articles and given numerous presentations. She is a recent past board member for USASP and current chair of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee for the American Society for Pain Management Nursing. Joe Cross is an Army veteran and a member of the Pain Opioid Core Veteran Engagement Panel. With lived experience of chronic pain and opioid use, Joe contributes to advancing research by providing valuable insights and collaborating on various projects. She is currently pursuing a doctorate in social work at the University of Southern California, Durwalk Peck School of Social Work. Joe's social work grand challenge is focused on ending homelessness, particularly among military veterans. She has made significant contributions as a member of the Veterans Program on the homeless team, working diligently to end veteran homelessness in Minnesota. And Regina Greer-Smith is president and CEO of Healthcare Research Associates, LLC, a community-based organization in California. Regina's mission includes building and maintaining collaboration between communities and stakeholders that enable improved healthcare outcomes with a primary focus towards addressing issues of health disparities and health inequities in vulnerable populations and underserved minority and communities with elevated risk. Regina collaborates with numerous academic medical centers with researchers, stakeholders, and interest holders, creating guidance and programs to ensure DEI and clinical trials worldwide. She holds a master's degree in public health and a Life Fellow Board certification with the American College of Healthcare Executive. She maintains membership in the national networks of libraries with Medicine Pacific Coast Region, as well as an ambassador for the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute since 2014. She was a member of PCORI's inaugural advisory panel for patient engagement and has co-authored numerous reports and manuscripts with research teams on engagement and collaboration between researchers and minority communities. So really incredible and impactful work that our speakers are doing. So we will start with an introduction with Dr. Star Booker to give us a brief history on Juneteenth and what freedom looks like in the context of pain care and management for African Americans.
Thank you. All right, let's share my screen. Okay, everyone seeing slides, not notes, correct?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so good morning to some, afternoon to others. I'm really excited about today's Juneteenth webinar. And it's so funny because this morning I was having a dream that somehow I was late to the webinar. And that really kind of freaked me out. So I'm glad I'm here on time, and I'm glad to see so many of you here with us today. So before we get into kind of the panel discussion or the question and answer, I wanted to kind of give a brief background on Juneteenth and kind of contextualize this in terms of chronic pain and authentic engagement with or in Black communities. So I do want to note that, anything that I talk about in my presentation reflects only my views, my intellectual property. So this does not reflect the University of Florida, the NIH, or USASP. So a little bit about the history of Juneteenth. So Juneteenth celebrations have been a part of some Black and African American communities for several decades, long before it was designated as a federal holiday. It wasn't always widely celebrated throughout Black communities, but it was recognized in some southern states, including my state of Louisiana. And so on January 1st, 1863, this is where the first quote unquote watch night where it developed. And so if you're familiar, a lot of churches on December the 31st have kind of like a midnight or a watch night service. Well, watch night began within the African American community. And this was the day that they were anticipating the Emancipation Proclamation being signed that would abolish slavery. However, it wasn't until about 2.5 years later that the news of the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation reached some enslaved individuals in Texas, and this was in June 1865. And this is when they were informed that they were no longer slaves, but that they were free. And so this day, June 19th, became known as Juneteenth. And so some of the first Juneteenth celebrations began subsequently in 1866. And even in the early 90s, I can remember my local community having Juneteenth celebrations. We typically have a small parade and then probably meet up at one of the local churches and have like a cookout. And I wanted to find some pictures, but I didn't have time to insert those. But I've been familiar with Juneteenth for many, many years. And then June 28, 2021, that is when Juneteenth became a federal holiday. And I'm really excited to see that this is the third webinar that USASP has dedicated to Juneteenth. And so that's really encouraging in terms of how do we really engage with communities and groups that we have historically excluded in some way. So when you think about the evolution of the perception of pain in African Americans, it started out with kind of this whole dehumanization. So, a lot of African Americans were thought of as property or unhuman, and they were treated as such, right? And property or things that are not human, they can't feel pain. And so a lot of enslaved individuals were treated as, unable to feel or experience pain or experience it in the same way that perhaps white individuals experience pain. And then we kind of move into this phase of experimentation where they wanted to experiment on Black bodies to understand, some of the biological, quote unquote, differences that perhaps some enslaved individuals have, right? And so we're all pretty familiar with some of the gynecological experiments done on Black female slaves by J. Marion Sims. But there were also experimentation on people who were poor or intellectually challenged within the Black community as well. And then we move into this period of desensitization, where we start to believe that Blacks as a group feel less pain than others. And we start to kind of we start to look at this as a biological difference, and it becomes kind of the accepted norm. And so when people, when you present to the hospital or the clinic, then, you know, healthcare providers, because of the implicit bias, now think that Blacks feel less pain. And then we move into criminalization. So back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, when drug use and drug misuse was pretty rampant in the Black community with cocaine and crack, and also the heroin epidemics, it was criminalized, and a lot of Black people were put in prison, and some people are still in prison for drug charges. However, when we moved into kind of the 2000s, when opioids were being misused and the rise of fentanyl, the focus shifted from criminalization to let's reduce harm and let's rehabilitate people. But most of these people were not African American, they were white individuals. So now we're kind of in this period of normalization where we have, in a sense, and I'm saying this very carefully, in a sense, we have normalized health disparities and worse outcomes in African American populations. And so anytime you go to any conference or hear any presentation or webinar, you hear about all these disparities and all of the challenges that are associated with being African American or Black race. However, we really need to move to this point of liberation, where we start to move beyond characterizing a group of people as being disparate or negative, but finding ways to really truly help liberate people from these worse health outcomes, from these poor pain outcomes, and really helping people to live free in their bodies and in society. So let's see, I think I skipped. Okay. So, you know, before you can truly engage with a community, you really have to first understand, you know, the biases that minoritized individuals face, really learn about the local history of a community and acknowledge those harms, and use yourself as an agent for healing and health. So I was really excited to see a new paper by Dr. Carmen Green come out last year in the Journal of Pain, where she so eloquently kind of uses this diagnostic kind of assessment approach to really understanding the genesis of the unequal burden of pain. And the chief complaint that she writes about is structural and institutional racism, as well as race-based disparities in healthcare, pain, and policing. And at the end, she gives some recommendations, which I would encourage everyone to take a look at this article, because she talks about the importance of representation and how that matters. She talks about trust. How do you earn trust? The legacy of pain research, including acknowledging the historical wrongs as well as the missed opportunities for full participation of minority health professionals, and questioning hypotheses and methodologies and findings from previous science that were accepted as truth. So kind of going back to my point about normalization and desensitization, right? So really questioning what is it that we know and what is it that we think we know? And then within that, what are the stereotypes and biases that we have embedded within that? And then also being an active listener, someone who is culturally sensible, humble, but also responsive. So, you know, for many decades, pain in African American and Black communities, you know, we've been unseen and unheard. And quite frankly, we've been unasked about pain. And so as a result, we are still in pain, but we're also misunderstood, misdiagnosed, and mistreated. And, because of this, we've had to develop coping mechanisms or styles to deal with pain and the related difficulties that accompany living with and managing pain. And Samantha Mites published a paper back in 2016, which looked at ethnic identity and coping styles. And as you can see here, that there are some differences in how African Americans and white participants cope with pain, including there's increased catastrophization in Blacks, there's more diverting attention, reinterpreting pain, and also more praying and hoping. And I'll give you a couple of examples of kind of this praying and hoping a little bit later, because this is a prominent strategy that African Americans use to just deal with pain on a daily basis. So Dr. Tamara Baker, myself, and Mary Genovic, we published a paper talking about kind of like a progressive agenda for pain research and pain management. And in that paper, we included a case study of Dr. Susan Moore, who was a physician who contracted COVID-19, and she documented her experience online. And as part of that experience, her pain was not well controlled, and she was ignored when she would report any pain or any other health conditions that she was experiencing. As a result, she did pass away. But what I want to use this case study to demonstrate is that, when you think about Juneteenth, even though it is a celebration of freedom, it was delayed freedom. It was delayed justice, and we were denied restitution. So a Juneteenth event, in a sense, is a delayed understanding, a delayed screening, delayed diagnosis, and denied treatment of pain. So when you think about, some of the disparities and inequities that have been continuously documented, not only in Black Americans, but in other minoritized populations, think about what were those Juneteenth events that contributed to those inequities and disparities. So what were those delayed events? So how did we get here, though? How have past and current systems and culture of care contributed to disparities and inequities, particularly for African Americans? So it was around 1619, some accounts say it was a little earlier, that the first enslaved Black person was brought to the US, and African Americans have now been here in the US for about 400 years as of 2019. But what we have to understand is how the foundation of America created generational cycles of disparities. So the founding fathers, they were all white, male, middle-aged landowners, and they had great authority. African Americans had none of this, right? And it was even hard for them to try to achieve any of this related to maybe owning land or just simply being free. They had no land, no money, no freedom, no education, no authority. In fact, we were counted as 3/5 human for the purposes of taxation and representation. And these enslaved individuals were unnamed, undocumented, and underrepresented. So when we really reflect on this was kind of the genesis or the start of adverse social determinants of health and biased policies and laws. So some of you have likely heard that your zip code is more important to your health than your genetic code. And unlike the founders of the US, Black Americans, we didn't have a choice to immigrate, right? We were forcibly kidnapped, stolen, trafficked, whatever words you want to use, and brought to the US. Their zip code changed dramatically, right? Essentially, they changed continents. So you have to think about what kind of trauma was embedded and passed down through generations because of this. They longed for their home, they longed for their families while being physically tortured and controlled, which caused great emotional and physical trauma and pain. So we have to really start to kind of question how these biobehavioral and psychosocial connections help us better address our biases And how can we use this to develop better care for people with historical trauma? So in a more practical example, we know that your zip code predicts whether you have access to pharmacies or pain medications, the quality of care that you receive at hospitals, and also whether you have access to any type of healthcare clinic in your community. Once we come to the realization that pain mistreatment in minoritized communities is a violation of civil rights and a national public health epidemic, then we are able to evaluate our current standards and practice. So I've shown this photo before, but it's supposed to be a photo of my maternal grandparents picking cotton, probably around the 1920s or 1930s. I'm not sure the time frame. But this photo makes me stop and think about the historical impact of pain. And in my dissertation interviews, there were some participants who recalled how their relatives modeled kind of this silent suffering where they never talked about pain, or they never went to get help or seek treatment for their arthritis. And so I'll read the quotes here. So one gentleman said, she didn't mention it, my grandma, oh, because she saw it as a weakness, she was dragging everything, dragging that cotton sack with 2 children on it. So here he's talking about how his grandmother didn't talk about arthritis or pain. She just dealt with it. She kept it to herself and did what she had to do to provide for her family. The second quote, we don't want no one to know. We can't blame that on self, though. It was instilled in us. Because if you think about it, back in the slavery, they had to do what they had to do. They had to hold it in order to survive. We can be in 99, kind of like 99 out of 100 pain, but we know we got to do the job so we can take care of our family. We're going to suffer through this pain. We ain't going to let nobody know it. Back then, your grandparents and parents, they didn't tell you if they was in pain or hurting, neither. So then it takes us to suffering to survive. And one lady said, African Americans are probably more capable or better able to accept and deal with pain than others, because African Americans have had to deal with so many adverse situations all through life, on down through the years. So really quickly, I wanted to just kind of give you some background on my upbringing, and I think that'll shed a little bit of light about why I'm so passionate about this topic of pain, inequities, and disparities. So in Louisiana during the 1960s, at the height of Jim Crow, there was a group of Black deacons from my hometown of Jonesboro, Louisiana. They came together to protect their community and their families from the KKK. And this historic group was memorialized in a movie in 2003 starring Forrest Whitaker. And more recently, they placed a memorial trail marker commemorating the Deacons for the Fence. And the last Deacon for the Fence, I don't have a pointer, but he is circled in the back. His name is Mr. Harvey Barnes. And he's pictured with me, which is right below him. I kind of blend in with the little kids there. But we were honored to be featured in a children's book on outstanding Black Americans of Jackson Parish that was written and published by Miss LaJulia Spence's class. And Mr. Harvey Barnes is one of the last Deacon for Defense. So just a few questions for you to think about during this conversation today. Given this brief history that you know about my community, how do you think you might engage with the Black community as a pain researcher in my hometown? What barriers might you face? And then what strengths of the community could you leverage to better understand the experience of rural Black Americans living with pain? So it's often hard for people to see and understand what they've never had to feel or experience. And I think that's one barrier to engaging with communities in a genuine and altruistic manner. And I just want to point you to a paper. I think this was the third paper in a 3-paper series that was focused on confronting racism in all forms of pain research. And in this particular paper, we talk about kind of this commitment to engagement, diversity, and also fair and equal dissemination. So I'm not going to go through all these different strategies. It's in the paper. But when you're thinking about authentic engagement, you need to think about it in multiple ways. So what does authentic engagement actually mean? Authentic, genuine, engagement, arrangement to meet. So it's a genuine arrangement to meet. And the goal is to co-produce knowledge and solutions that transcend generations as it relates to pain. So a few things I want to point out that you might consider is, first, understand and respect national Black history, but more importantly, local history of Black communities. I want you to think about how can you center the community's voice and needs. So I always talk about showing face and sharing space. So showing up and then actively engaging with people. So sharing space with them. We all should relinquish the role of expert and become a learner in order to reimagine recruitment, engagement, and retention. And I think we also need to become familiar and comfortable with relativism and reconstruction of the lived experience, because once you enter a community, you know, what you thought you knew likely will not hold up. So your knowledge will become relative when you step into a new community or a Black community, right? And be okay with maybe having some of your own life experiences and perceptions reconstructed. These are two tables from a paper published by Dr. Fayron Epps, who does wonderful community engaged research with Black communities and older adults with dementia. And a few things I just want to note here. She has the first table, some common principles for engaging with the community. Be respectful, meet them where they are, and empower and co-develop sustainability plans. I think if you follow these principles, I think this is, especially if you're still trying to figure out how do I get into community engagement. Sorry, that's my timer to tell me it's time for me to end. But you know, it's a lot of times it's hard for people who are not already engaged in this type of work to start this type of work. They don't know where to begin. So I think if you read this paper, it will give you some really good examples, some practical examples and strategies for how you can actually engage with the community. So as I get ready to close here, we need to flip the script, right? So we've been identified as 3/5. We've been racialized as Black. We've been socialized as minorities. And we've been minoritized as other or subhuman, unhuman, and inferior. But we need to be fully reconciled as full constitutional citizens, justified by changes in legislation and policies to be more fair and equitable, and also, you know, to be apologized to or to go through that reconciliation process for the atrocities that have been committed. What I want to point out here very, very quickly is we've been talking a lot in the past few years about how do we kind of reshape our thinking about pain in different populations, and how do we strike down systems of inequity. And ultimately, I think we have to shift our approach to pain care and really think about pain affirming care and what does that look like in different populations. So pain affirming care is an empathy driven and personalized approach that integrates evidence-based care, principles of equity, and intersectionality, as well as proactive population health and preventive measures, so that people and patients in the fullness of their identity and personhood always receive the best and most just care. So it goes beyond just simply believing someone has pain, but really acknowledging their diverse experiences, their life experiences, their identity, and also how they present with pain. A lot of times we have these preconceived notions of what a person with pain looks like and how they should act and behave. But I think we should accept them right where they are. If they present as a person who's crying, okay, if they present as a person who's able to talk on the phone and be and joke, right? We have to look beyond kind of these physical manifestations and behaviors and really see the person as a whole, get to know their pain experience. So what are some points of freedom as it relates to pain in African Americans? These are a few things that I think have really helped to advance pain equity and helping to move us from disparities to health equity. And I'm not going to go through these, but if you want some of these slides, I can send those to you. But I want to point out, I was really excited and proud to be part of kind of the 3-paper series confronting racism and pain research that was published in 2022 in the Journal of Pain, because I really think it walks us all through how we can start to reconceptualize, but also reconstruct our scientific methods. So if you're not familiar, Adfield launched an initiative called Believe My Pain, where their focus is on promoting pain equity in Black and African American communities. So if you have a few minutes, take a little time to kind of look at their website, see some of their initiatives and some of their resources. This is another resource that I think is a good read if you get bored. And in closing, most of you know my faith is very much part of my identity and the reason why I do the work that I do. And so I just want to leave you with, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And a second one is to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment and equity. So with that, I do want to leave you with a few reflection questions for you to kind of just think about and maybe give us a little bit of what you're thinking in terms of, how can you authentically engage with the community? What are some of those Juneteenth events that you have observed in your area of pain research or pain practice? And what are some of the victories, that we have seen in pain research? So with that, I am going to close and open it up.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Booker, for the presentation and for grounding us with this history and the great resources. And also thank you, Dr. Kern, for adding to the chat some of Yale's local contacts. Anyone in the audience, please feel free to reflect on these questions and add your responses to the chat. We're going to move on and start with the panel. So we'll begin with the first question. So in your experience, what types of topics work well for community-based researchers? Panel members, please feel free to unmute yourselves and respond.
I would like to go first. Good morning, everybody. I'm on the West Coast, and Dr. Starr, I will say that this is the most remarkable presentation of pain aspects, this historical aspects of pain, and the focus on our community, African American community. I will share that I am I checked all the boxes of the focus of your study. I'm 65 years older, with several chronic conditions, retired, and living in a retirement community, and and have chronic pain. What really resonated to me from your presentation was how African Americans like me, part of our pain management is prayer. I woke up with prayer this morning. I also am focused and really focused on engaging or being engaged and engaging others with the aspects of pain. Pain management being part of Dr. Darnell's program in progress. Pain is a very highly unrecognized and focused part of healthcare and healthcare. I've never ever been approached about pain management or even asked about pain assessment for my arthritis and lupus that I have. So I am really, really grateful for this focus. I will say it's quite heartbreaking as well, because I know if I've got pain, there's a lot of people besides me of all races, especially African Americans, because we are suffering in silence. Being a PCORI ambassador and being part of PCORI research, community-based research and patient-centered outcomes research since 2012. As Brittany mentioned, I was on the inaugural panel. So I am very much focused and have been part of current research and past research with community engagement. And my focus and attempt is to bridge our communities with researchers who want to build relationships of trust so that we can together for our voices to be heard and incorporated in the work so that we ensure that the outcomes and learned experiences, the lived experiences for people like me are included in the research. So, I want to say that I am grateful for this. It's going to be a journey, for not only us patients, but our research partners and physicians and people who care for us, families, to really recognize that this pain is real and how can we address it, especially the social aspect. Now I am finding, and others are finding, that pain can be quite isolating and really impacts your mental health and your social behaviors, not only with families, but with your communities as well. So with that, I'm going to stop, and Joe, I'm going to hand it off to you because I'm excited to hear what you have to say, because you're not far from me, and I do things at USC as well.
Thank you. So one, I appreciate the beginning of our PowerPoint. That presentation was wonderful, and I appreciate everything you've just shared, Regina. What I would say in terms of the first question is having open forums such as this, as well as having like listening sessions or work groups that involve the individuals with the lived experience so that you can learn from them, because we're not subject matter experts on this. Yes, we may have had experience. I have lived experience with chronic pain. I'm also a military veteran, and I've had lived opioid experience. But you need to be able to involve all of those in the community. And so in the communities in which you've lived, and that is something that I've learned personally from my research and my work with the Minnesota Department of Veteran Affairs. And that way, we're not only just gaining that knowledge, but we're also learning how to not re-traumatize an individual. We're learning what traumas that they're going through. We're learning information on triggers so that we can continue to keep our community safe and continue to progress and move forward. Thank you.
Did you want me to add something to that? So the question was about what topics for community-based research?
Yes, what topics work well for community-based research? A follow-up on what topics work less well.
Okay, yeah. So topics that work well for community-based research are topics that align with the community's needs. So that could be a range of different things. But one thing I wanted to point out is, if you already have like a large NIH grant that already has like a structured focus, you might want to consider a supplement that will address the community's needs and try to, align the community's needs with, what your grant is currently focusing on. If your current grant does not have a community-based focus, then maybe a supplement could have a more community engaged focus.
Can I also add that, as a community-based partner, my hope has always been, as I've gone through many or participated in many community-based research projects, are not only developing partnerships, but to have those in place. And I'm thinking, as Joe mentioned, not only starting partnerships once you've been awarded, but working with your universities and your community-based partners to really develop, the partnership infrastructure so that they can support your research and add value to your research, and really having the voice in your have the voice and relationships with your community way before you start your research. So the existing partnerships, developing and maintaining, sustaining those partnerships, and ensuring that your partners are, I will say, co-PIs with what you where your focus is in the community, and also building on as you go forward building on the infrastructure that you already have existing, and to create new partnerships. Because the trust is really the initial building block of a community-based research.
Thank you all so much for your responses. Great points. Joe, you make a good point as well of trying not to trigger previous traumas for people in our communities. So what should researchers keep in mind with working with community members with pain from minoritized backgrounds?
This is Joe again. I believe that researchers should keep in mind that every individual is different, every individual is unique, and they all bring a different story. Having that narrative and understanding that narrative, being where you can be open to receive that information that they are sharing, where the space is not a judgmental space, is not, hey, I believe this. It is not based on one's perception, but what that individual is bringing.
I agree with that. The cultural sensitivity and humility is very important, and listening as well. Understanding the individual as being part of the community, but also being a unique member of that community as well. It's very important to listen and to create the relationships so that there can be sharing and developing more relationships in the community.
Yeah, I agree. Those are all great points. And kind of going back to something that I mentioned earlier, getting to know the local history. So not just national history, but the local history of your community. Because that'll help you understand how you might need to approach different individuals. And then focus on the strengths and assets of the community, and don't lead with the negatives or disparities. And I'll give you a quick example. So when I was doing my dissertation research, I was talking to an African-American woman. I think she was about 50 at the time. And, I was pointing out some of the quote unquote disparity facts. So everything that's wrong in the Black community as relates to pain. And she rejected a lot of that. And I had to sit there and think, okay, so how do I reframe this conversation? But it challenged me to think about my approach, right? So not just spewing out all of these negative facts or information, but maybe starting out with kind of reframing to, a more positive, this is the purpose, right? We are here to help you and others in the community identify better ways to manage pain. Not Black folks have worse pain and worse everything else. That wasn't the approach. And so I learned a lot from just that one experience. So just, being mindful of how you approach people and how you approach the community.
I would agree with you, Dr. Starr. Oftentimes when researchers come to our community, it's difficult for many community people to really understand because they're talking at academic. So it's very important that I think the partnership begins with maybe conversations before you go to the community at large, to translate and to understand, as Dr. Starr mentioned, the community, and to ensure that the way you communicate and what's communicated is understandable and is sensitive to the particular community. So Dr. Starr, that example that you gave is very, very important, and I've experienced that quite a bit, to the point of we had to retrain. We had to train our research partners on how to treat us and communicate with us. So it really, really makes a big difference on how that initial or that communication starts off. Because oftentimes we get a lot of academic, and it's like, no. So thank you for that, Dr. Starr. That's very important.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Starr, and thank you, Joe and Regina, for your responses as well. I have a follow-up. So what do researchers owe to community members? What specifically can we do to help community partners with lived experience of chronic pain from minoritized backgrounds?
For me, I will share that I am actually very grateful for this focus and this webinar. I'm personally, and I know people like me and others are looking to partner with researchers who have a focus on pain management, especially for our communities. I know what my lived experience is, but learning now from this presentation that it has been studied and recognized and is being addressed through partnerships and research really is providing hope. And also from Dr. Starr's presentation, learning that some of the things that I've been doing with, I would say not only the healthcare, but with the prayer is really a part of the lived experience. So being recognizing, the lived experience and some of the things in our historical background and future outlook for pain management is really it's giving me personal hope, but also the recognition that this is existing and to validate my lived experience at this time.
For me, I believe researchers owe their community members the information, the ideas, and potentially a way forward based on their studies that they are committing in those communities, because that information can help to, as Regina stated, bring about hope. It can bring about change. It can even continue our advocacy efforts for our individuals of color, and it'll continue to help us move forward and produce more information. I would say my example would lead to the military community. I am focused on the military community because I am a military veteran, but I'm also a Black individual that's a military veteran, and that healthcare community is so sparse. The information and the knowledge coming into the world of social work, it is not really there, and having to develop it on one's own and just pulling from others that are in is hard because I'm not able to rely on previous research or previous data. I have to look into other communities that have data, whereas this community does not. And so like sharing that information, sharing that knowledge allows us to continue to provide to our future generations so that they can continue to ensure that they are successful or that they're able to help provide that care for that next generation and so forth.
Thank you, Regina and Joe. Really important to, prioritize dissemination and sharing this information, like you said. I have one last question before we open up for the Q&A for our panelists. How do you see community-based research as having evolved in recent years? What is something that you have seen in this evolution that has been extremely helpful for this progression? And what do you see happening in the next few years?
I currently see and have experienced and participated in working with organizations, specifically organizations that are funders. They are now requiring, as part of the CBR, engagement, like PCORI does the engagement rubrics to give guidance and principles on aspects of engaging communities of all types, requiring training and engagement, and also identifying, working with communities and building a relationship and really specific metrics to ensure engagement in research, and developing ways for communities to engage also, ensuring that their time is valued, their voice is heard, going back and forth between communities and really being embedded in the community and having community partners who are also leads is really ensuring that engagement is one of the focal points of research.
So I've seen the community evolve in the recent years in that I'm a member of the Veterans Engagement Pain and Opioid Core study, that researcher that is here in Minnesota. And it's involved whereas it is actually seeking the information or input from veterans of all eras that have experienced pain and opioid use. And so that is an involvement because you're involving that group into how to move forward. I've also seen the involvement in that they've included what's called a simulated patient actor. And so that there's an individual that is a veteran or that has been in that health community that they're looking forward to serving, so that the providers that are with that veteran or with that member of the community, they know how to react, what responses to give, or what responses or what things to ask and look for in that community. And so it's like not everyone cries when they're in pain. Some people literally hold it, bear it, and they can keep moving. But there's other signs to look for, and having those types of studies allows one to see like, hey, what's going on, or how can I enter this community and be effective?
Thank you, Joe and Regina, for your responses. We have an anonymous question. Joe, you had mentioned that it's important to share information for smaller communities and brought up having multiple intersectional identities. Wondering if the panelists can speak on the importance of having an intersectional lens in engaged research.
Yes, having the ability to have an intersectional lens, or just a way to look at the broad aspect of an individual. Looking at me, you wouldn't be able to tell I'm a veteran of 10 years. I've served as both an enlisted as well as an officer. I'm a United States Military Academy graduate. I'm also I was the bottom of my class for my bachelor's, but I did my master's in social work at the University of Western New Mexico, top of my class, summa cum laude. And so it's like understanding those different lenses, those different things. I can speak to you in Arabic, Alura Arabia, because I have that background, I have that knowledge. But you have to build that rapport and that trust within those communities. And the only way to do that is to be authentically you. And that authentically you is wrapped around so many identities. And so having the ability to use all of your identities and not shutting them down to intersect with that individual, intersect into all those communities, allows one to be able to be effective in making that change.
And if I could just add a point to what Joe mentioned, but also to the previous question about how community-based research has evolved. I think that we have to also think about or having more freedom to like use language and frameworks that speak to all the various identities, but also that speak to the African American culture and experience. And you know, not being hindered to use such frameworks, right? But really to help people understand why we might use certain frameworks or language. And then also I've seen community-based research evolved in that kind of the different strategies that people are using to engage with communities. You know, when community-based and participatory research really first came out, it was all about community advisory boards. You know, you had to develop a community advisory board. And that's good, and I do that. But maybe even thinking about how can we be more creative with those community advisory boards so that we don't create tokenism and that we don't just, you know, include the same people over and over, you know, taxing them. But think about having like a rotating community advisory board, right? So it's different people at different times talking about different issues, so that you get all of these different perspectives and these different identities of people coming together to find solutions to problems that have plagued our community for decades.
Thank you, Dr. Booker and Joe. Final question for our panelists before we wrap up. Are there any problems or issues that you've encountered in starting up or participating in engaged research, and how did you address it? Is there anything that researchers should be aware of when starting up this type of community research?
I will say that I've been participating in community research since 2010, and I have, first as a panelist with Pcori, but then as the awards went out, I was asked to participate in research. And what was really important for me and for others is to get the I'll say agreements, understanding what the research was going to be about, what our roles were going to be, how our time was going to be would be valued, and what was the expectation on both sides. And actually, will our voices be heard, and what will we get out of the research, and will it come back to the community? So I think that has evolved quite nicely. It continues to evolve as new participants and new communities are being engaged. So it'll be different, but having a framework and a path for engagement is extremely important. And knowing the community that will be your partners is really a key to all of it. And really being authentic with the community that you're going to be working with is extremely vital.
Brittany, I wonder if we want to open it up to see if anybody has anything they want to share with us or comments.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone would like to unmute themselves or put in the chat anything that's coming up for them before we wrap up, any questions that you have for the panelists.
Hi, this is Beth Darnell. First of all, just a really amazing panel. Thank you all for your presentations and comments. I was really struck by something that Joe said, which was that each person is an individual. And I was wondering what the panel thinks about how to best ensure that through our efforts to engage patients and lived experience, that there isn't a phenomenon of tokenism that arises where there's one person and it's just their perspective. How do we ensure that we are reflecting really better reflecting the population of perspectives amongst any group of individuals? Thank you.
I think sometimes people are reluctant to share their lived experience. So I think there's got to be a mechanism or a method to engage, with all of the safety aspects and other areas, because some people want to lend their voices, they're too afraid to lend their voices. But I think a very important aspect of lived experiences, especially for a community, are not captured. So I think there's a way to work with the community, or there should be a way, and to create a unique way to really support those who aren't as vocal or as extroverted as others to be included, to participate. I've worked with researchers to help support those who are part of a research team or advisory panel to support and to hear their voices. You can get some very rich information from people sometimes after meetings, even though there are formal framework for formal conversations. Sometimes afterwards, or some other times might be could support better more conversations and broader conversations.
Thank you, Regina. I just want to read a question that we got in the chat. Do you have thoughts on how to incorporate intersectionality in reporting and analysis and pain research? And Dr. Booker said, asking participants how they'd like to identify and finding ways to categorize that in a succinct manner. Also considering incorporating ethnographic methods to really understand intersectionality and the community. And Troy responded as well, it's great to include in your intro that individuals are more than just singular identities. Does anyone else have any questions they would like to ask the panelists? Well, we are a little over 10 or 1. So I want to thank everyone for participating, for your questions. Thank you so much to our panelists, Dr. Star Booker, Joe Cross, and Regina Greer-Smith. We'll be emailing the recording of the event within the next day or so. Thank you all so much for your engagement and for this great discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.